Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast, working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
You know, what I've learned to do, and Jackson has taught me to do it, is to really look for the brilliance, see the bright light inside your child, the joy of who Jackson is and the incredible way that he's shown us who he is and the laughter and the joy that we have.
That's our guest this week, David Barth, a licensed therapist, father of Jackson, who's autistic, and co-founder of Team Autism, a not-for-profit that builds autism awareness in the local community. We'll hear David's story on this week's Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello now to our host, David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
Now let's hear this intriguing conversation between David Hirsch and David Barth.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with David Barth of Sand-Piint, Idaho, a licensed therapist, father of a son with autism, and co-founder of Team Autism, a not-for-profit organization. David, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Well, David, it's great to be here with you. Thanks.
You and your wife, Lisa, have been married for 26 years and are the proud parents of Jackson, 23, who has autism. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about your family.
Sure. I was born in Cumberland, Maryland. Mom and a dad and a brother and a sister. That's me. And in my early years, we lived in community with one family briefly for about 6 or 9 months together. And then my family moved with 4 other families into an intentional community in southern Maryland. So we had 10 adults and 15 kids on an Amish farm with no electricity and no plumbing. I had a lot of, quote, siblings and adults around. And so I learned a lot about work ethic and playing and fighting and figuring stuff out. Pretty formative for me. So I count that as my growing up period. I'm also the product of a divorce. My parents separated and then divorced 4 years later, finally when I was about 11. And both of my parents have been, incredibly in my life. And the 4 of us are still very close. And I feel very fortunate for the whole deal.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. I don't know that I've met anybody who I would say is Amish.
Well, no, let me clearly correct you. We bought an Amish farm. We were all non-Amish. But the Amish rolled away in their buggies and we moved in with our, Western American mid-70s back to the land idealism. So we had animals and gardens and lots of community building to deal with.
Yeah, well, thank you for the clarification. So out of curiosity, what did your dad do for a living?
Sure. My dad has been ordained Lutheran pastor for going on 55 years now. And he just preached Holy Week last month, and he has interims. He just still really enjoys it, and he slows down much more than he used to.
Excellent. And how would you describe your relationship with him?
It's really great. It certainly has had its ups and downs. We have learned to really appreciate each other, have done lots of work together in the witness and circle of other men. We've both been part of men's groups and have sat with each other and done, significant work with each other, father-son kind of stuff, where working through upsets and judgments, clearing the way for the huge love that we have for each other. And so I'm really grateful for that ability that he and I have, whatever's in the way, and just being able to be so clear about our love for each other.
Yeah, well, we'll take a little bit deeper dive in a few minutes, but thank you for clarifying. And were there any important takeaways, a lesson or two learned that come to mind when you think about your dad?
He's an idealist, and he's a dreamer, and he's a doer. So I've certainly learned about putting my mind to things that I can envision. Remember watching him train for a marathon and, do other things, build a house, drive us across the country on road trips. He would, I remember graduating from high school, and he'd said, David, we can't really afford to send you anywhere, so you should just go where you want. It's only money. and so there was just an ease that I felt from him, a can do, what's possible way about it that sometimes didn't turn out always the way he thought, but there was certainly a willingness more than oh, this will never work attitude about him.
Yeah, well, it's almost like he has a faith, right? A belief.
Indeed.
And was that part of the bedrock for his outlook on life or not?
Well, as a man of faith, for sure. And watching him continually, we laugh about it, being humbled because he's still thinking it's like that he's in charge. And then he's like, I keep thinking this, and oh my God, I'm so not in charge. and so just that the humility and the grace that's along with his hubris about, I got this. And then to come to find out, I so don't got this. And that's been a great model for me of keeping my own young man ego in check when I was a young man, and then realizing I'm not really in charge. I do what I can, but I have the grace of spirit or God or the universe coming along with me. And so those are certainly parts that I've learned from him.
That's great. Thank you. So I know that you have an undergrad degree and a master's degree, and your master's degree is in counseling. And I'm wondering, where did your career start and where has it taken you?
That's a great question. I would say the roots were watching my dad, who is also a marriage and family therapist. Here's an interesting story. So while he was in his training early on, I told you, David, that at first my family and another family got together, and we were all living together. And there's this thing early in the 70s of open marriage. And so my family and this family thought, well, that's a cool idea. Let's see what happens. Well, it happened. And it didn't end like you think. It ended like it does. But which is the two families split. My own work into working with people, I was a wilderness guide working with adjudicated youth in wilderness programs. I had a stint at Outward Bound, using the wilderness outdoors as a medium for growth. And that shifted into working with therapeutic boarding schools. Did that for 20 odd years in different settings. And knowing that I really enjoyed group work with young kids and the dynamic, the energy in the room, and watching that happen and watching the transformation of these young people as they confronted their own fears and limits and feelings and expressed them and were witnessed, I was taken by that, fascinated by that. And so it came to be where I realized, well, I want to do this too. So I was doing the work, but then decided I'm going to go get the professional training.
That's fabulous. Well, thanks for sharing. And I'm sort of curious to know, how did you and Lisa meet?
Well, we met at Outward Bound. We were both Outward Bound instructors. I remember she was finishing her season down there. I was just starting mine. I had an injury in my shoulder. I decided to cancel my contract, but I drove across the country and called her and said, I'm coming east. Turned into a 7-day date, and then we kind of did this long distance thing. But we really connected on the outdoors. And so in our early years together, we did road trips, rock climbing in the Tetons in California, up in Canada. Jackson's name comes from Jackson Hole. We climbed the Grand Teton together and decided to officially engage while we were on that week-long climbing trip in the Tetons. So that's the beginnings of our history there.
Let's talk about special needs initially on a personal level and then beyond. So I'm sort of curious to know, prior to Jackson's diagnosis, did you or Lisa have any exposure to the world of special needs?
Not really directly. We kind of learned about autism ourselves, as it came our way.
That's fair. So I'm sort of curious to know what is the diagnosis and how did it come about?
Yeah, Jackson, he has autism. He was born in 1998. And so by December of 2000, we got a diagnosis. He was just over 2 years old. In his early first months, he was really challenging to soothe. We started noticing just differences in how he was, but we didn't have anything to guide by. A friend of ours, with courage, brought a book over and said, "Hey, you know what? I think you want to look at this. Here's some information for you." And so we read that. It was a parent's history of her child with autism. And so then I started looking at the internet and checklists of autism, and Jackson hit, 3/4 of them. We went to our pediatrician and said, "Hey, we're concerned about autism." And interestingly, at that time, she said, "Well, it's not that." And we left feeling not really knowing what to feel because it didn't help us much. So we eventually worked through Birth to Three services who could say, well, this is probably what's happening. We can't give you the diagnosis. We found a developmental pediatrician in a nearby town and said, "Could you please give us a diagnosis? We need to get going on this."
So that's how your journey started.
Yeah, with unknowns, and then looking at it and then having to say, well, let's get on it. At that time, there was work to be done, and we used a pretty intensive biomedical approach. There's something called Defeat Autism Now, DAN, that was, and maybe still is, a group of scientists and doctors probably who started it because either they had children or knew of children who were on the spectrum, and their research was looking at the biomedical history of kids on the spectrum. So we did a lot of supplementation and heavy metal chelation. We changed Jackson's diet, things like that. We also did ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. That's one of the main behavioral ways of training, teaching, differentiating very basic ideas, big, little, small, colors. And there's a very rote way of training. And so we did 25 hours a week for about a year, I bet. And I'm sure that assisted quite a bit. Lots of challenges for Jackson and us. Of course, he is our only child. And at that time, for the first 5 years, we were just keeping our heads above water, it felt like.
When you think about the beginning of that experience, like you were just describing, were there any fears you can remember or recall that you and Lisa might have had or expressed to one another?
Oh, well, fears, sadness. I don't know if it was expressed, but certainly felt of, what are we going to do? How's this going to go? The unknown was really big. A moment I was, working at one of these therapeutic boarding schools, and we have a big climbing wall on the campus, and I was out there in the spring, putting a wrench on all the nuts and bolts, just making sure it was tight. And I was standing up at the top of it, just looking out over the trees, and I had a moment of where I first let it sink in, something's wrong with my child. And I sort of denied it, but not given me that moment. And so that was, I would say, the first one that I had with myself, but we've had many since, Lisa and I together, of, oh, this is so hard and this is sad. And I could say that we have not dwelled there primarily because we still have work to do. We still got to be together and moving forward. So there's been an ability to have those moments with each other, and then also, and let's continue. The other side of that sorrow is the joy of who Jackson is and the incredible way that he's shown us who he is, and the laughter and the joy that we have in all of it. So, it's 23 years on now, but it's been a mix of those two main feelings.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. Thank you for your insights as well as authenticity. Was there any meaningful advice you got early on that helped put the situation in perspective when you look back on it?
Our ABA therapist, she was kind of the main one. She's a doctorate candidate who was trained in ABA. And so she was helping us understand how this would work and how things would shift. And so there are things that young kids and even my adult son has they're called stims or self-stims. So they could be phrases or language, or could be flapping hands, ways of probably getting sensory information in a way that's sort of stereotypic and non-regular. And we were saying, oh my gosh, well, are these stims going to change? Are they going to last? And she said, well, these ones will stop, and then there'll be other ones, as in, it's not stopping though. So it helped me really learn early to just accept this and notice that there will be some changes, but don't get set on anything.
So not to focus on the negative, but what have been the biggest challenges that you and Lisa, or Jackson for that matter, has faced?
Just a logistical one. Jackson needs to be cared for all the time. He's verbal, thankfully, but his safety awareness, it's not like we would leave him in the house alone. I mean, I'll go in the backyard while he's inside, but we wouldn't leave the house to run an errand and leave him in the house. So one of us has always been on. We don't live near our families. Lisa's brothers had moved to town maybe 15 years ago, so we have an uncle nearby, but the need for us to always have coverage has been a constant. We've turned that into our lives, but that's been a challenge. And I would say currently, David, just the anxiety that Jackson has. I work with young people, and a lot of young people today have anxiety. I think autism in particular, given that there's a need for structure and sameness and constancy, and that's not the world. And so I think it's super difficult for Jackson and I know other people in the spectrum when they are confronted by the uncertainties, the rogue wave over the bow that you weren't expecting. That's pretty tough for him. So we do a lot of kind of co-regulating with him, trying to assist him back into a place that's not, at 6, it's one thing, but having a 23-year-old be loud and big and angry, that's a lot for him and others. He's not a cute kid anymore. So that's a challenge often.
Yeah, well, thanks for making reference to the logistics, especially given the fact that you don't have extended family nearby. Anxiety is something that I guess is associated with autism, but your point is the larger community, right? I don't know if it's COVID related or just social media related, but there seems to be a heightened level of anxiety, right? There's a higher level of awareness what everybody else is doing and comparing yourself to one another, and maybe some expectations that seem to be disjointed, maybe exaggerated because of the fast-paced world that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all good, it's not all bad, but I think that there's some things that we'll probably reflect on years, if not decades down the road, right? The impact that social media has had and some of these other circumstances that we're all living through, right, for the first time. So,
yeah.
So I'm thinking about supporting organizations, and I'm wondering if there's any organizations that come to mind that have benefited your family or Jackson directly.
The group Defeat Autism Now was one that wasn't really a group, but we found a doctor who, worked with that paradigm. The Autism Society, there are lots of different groups around. So our current, the group up here, the Panhandle Autism Society, that was one that we engaged in a little bit. They're really working with trying to build support groups and direct or be a clearinghouse for different resources. And we were working on our own, finding resources, local occupational therapists and speech therapists and things like that. The school was a big resource for us, even in our little community of Sand-Piint. It was pretty small. The quality of the professionals in the school district we paired with, that's been really helpful. These are all early formative things. And currently now Jackson goes to, there is one adult developmental disability agency in our town, and that's where these are now adults with chronic disability who want programming and support and learning and community. And so Jackson goes there 4 days a week, and he really likes it. It's also anxious sometimes. Who's going to be there? Is this person going to be there? But that's an agency that we have found and partnered with we feel so grateful. Here's a community because we don't have it. We just have the two of us. So we're really happy that Panhandle Special Needs Inc., PSNI, is a place where we're welcomed and Jackson is welcomed.
We'll be back with more of the conversation on the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast in just a few moments. But first, this quick message. Please help 21st century dads gather research on families raising children with special needs by having them complete the Special Fathers Network Early Intervention Parents Survey. A link to the survey can be found in the show notes. As a token of our appreciation, each person, mom or dad, who completes the survey will receive a Great Dad coin. Thank you. Now, back to the conversation.
So I'd like to switch gears and talk about Team Autism. And I'm wondering, what's the backstory and what motivated you and Lisa to help create that?
Right. We call it Team Autism 24/7, 24/7. It's a nonprofit that currently is, I would say, in pause and maybe out to pasture, as it were. It's had a life of 8 solid years. The mission of Team Autism is really building and bringing awareness, community, understanding, and advocating to the local autism community of Sand-Piint. So our focus was really bringing resources and joining resources with families living on the autism spectrum and also the professionals who work with them. This came out of a group that put together a team for the Race Across America, RAM, back in 2011. There's a local brewery. The brewmeister had an employee whose grandson was on the spectrum, and they were into bikes and riding, and they thought, well, this will be a good cause to ride for. So there's a group of people coming together to ride in a team. And so a good friend of mine who's in the men's group that I'm in and is also a bicycle rider got connected with these guys. And I said, Wayne, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm going to ride this ride. It's called Race Across America, and we're going to do it for autism. And I said, well, if you're doing it, I'm in. And so I was on the crew. So we spent a year not knowing what we were doing and planning. And the riders, we had 4 main riders, but then of course we had a 5th training in the wings, because what if something happens? Of course, something did happen. So that 5th rider joined in, but we did in June of 2011, started in Oceanside in California, and in one leg, one heat or one, lap, as it were, nonstop all the way to Annapolis, Maryland.
And how many days did that take, out of curiosity?
6 days, 9 hours and 28 minutes. And we had a wicked tailwind through most of the Midwest, through eastern Colorado and Kansas, really great conditions. It was, I'm sure, unusually good conditions that year. So we were blessed.
That sounds really fast, because isn't it about 3,200 miles?
I'm not exactly sure anymore how far it is, but longer than you'd think. You'd think it would take another day. So the outgrowth of this was to raise money and awareness. So there was a pot of money that came. And because that was so successful, Laughing Dog Brewery, it was Team Laughing Dog, a group of 4 women rode the next year, and they also raised money for autism. Maybe it's because we knew what we were doing a little bit more, but that crew did a pretty good job. So there was a nest egg that they wanted to provide. And so we created, Wayne, the rider, and Lisa and I created Team Autism 24/7. It's a 501(c)(3). We took in that money, and then over the years, we hosted our own cyclocross events, because we like to ride bikes as a fundraiser. But then we ended up creating grants for families and professionals who could apply for, if they wanted a new tricycle or an iPad, or a professional might want a new training for OT that they wanted to go to. So we could provide monies for the benefit of both the families and the professionals. April is Autism Awareness Month, and so we did a series over many years of bringing a film that highlighted autism or family or a cause to our local theater. Things shifted over time. It was right around just before COVID. We looked at each other saying, God, are we going to put on this cross event? And we're like, maybe not. And so then COVID hit. It was an easy, I'm not blaming it on that, but I think our energy shifted by then. And so at this point, we have not picked it up, and we're willing to at this point say we haven't picked it up. We don't think we will.
Well, thank you for sharing. We've talked before, you know, that some of the roots for the 21st Century Dads Foundation and therefore the funding for the Special Fathers Network also have a riding connection.
Indeed, that's right.
And I love the concept of Team Laughing Dog. Is that what it was called?
Laughing Dog Brewery, yeah. They make really hoppy, excellent beers.
Right, okay. So we're going to have to continue the conversation, not now, but in the future. But thanks for sharing. Very inspiring. And the other organization that I know that we talked about because it's how we came together is Evryman. And I'm wondering if you can share with our listening audience what that organization is and what role you've played.
Yeah, Evryman, Evryman, the second E is not in the name. It's a national and even international group that really supports and serves and teaches men's groups. And there are intensive couple day long workshops and teachings. There are virtual groups and seated groups that you can learn how to become a part of a group of men, really to learn about yourself and to become a better father, man, husband, teacher. The main focus of Evryman is learning an emotional language that typically we men in the Western world aren't taught to be or to do, which is to be fully embraced in our feelings and emotions, but not taken out by them. So a lot of the work is exploring our inner worlds and having a group of other men to witness, support, challenge, and ultimately love all of those parts of us. So Evryman was created by a man named Owen Marcus and some other fellows. You know, it started a year before I got there. So there's a group of men in our little town of 8,000, and Owen brought some men together. And, you know, within the first year, I was a part of that group. And we've had, I don't know, hundreds of men over the years who've come and gone, and there's been a core of us who've stuck. We currently have nearly 40 men who sit in 4 different groups. One of them is still virtual, it's still a vestige of COVID. The concepts, the teachings that Owen drew from his own world and wanted to build, he's a brilliant teacher and leader because he's like, I don't know what we're doing, but let's do it. And this is where I did my main work around autism. So I was telling you about fears and grief and anger and sadness and having a place to be that way with my brothers. That's been the hugest change in my life. It's kept my marriage together. It's held our family together. I know all 3 of us, Jackson and Lisa and I, are, you know, dear friends with many of these guys, many other men who have, you know, seen Jackson grow up, who have helped me grow up with autism, are my brothers today. And they're, you know, from this idea of working together as men.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing. And it's not lost on me that you might not have a blood family, immediate, you know, blood family nearby. You do live in a relatively small town.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it sounds like this group has played a very key role in your personal development and therefore with your family, directly or indirectly. So I'm thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering what type of advice can you share with a parent, perhaps specifically a dad who finds himself with a recent diagnosis, or somebody who has an older child for that matter?
You know, what I've learned to do, and Jackson has taught me to do it, is to really look for the brilliance, see the bright light inside your child. Obviously, you're the parent, you see that. The other thing I would say is find a solid group to go and be able to be yourself with. For the first several years, it felt like it was just Lisa and me. I was lonely. I didn't know what to say or do or how to be. And these men gave me space and encouraged me to express. And once I knew that I had that in me and started doing it, I didn't want to stop. So I would say, find a place, whether it's a group or an individual or a support group, where you can be seen and met and held where no one's going to try to fix it. This is the other thing I'd say, David, about our men's group. We're absolutely not about advice. Men want to fix it. Give me a power tool, I'll fix it. That is not the ethic that we work with. We say, great, tell me more. Be even more the way you are. So for dads, I would say, know that you're not alone, but you may not have found that group yet or that person. And I would say, look, because the journey is so much more rich now that I can share Jackson with so many of my brothers, and he lights up when he sees some of these guys. He's just thrilled to see them. And I would only have gotten that if I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't have found a group or a place to be. Community is really it. So I guess it's the root from where I started, growing up with a bunch of people.
You've gone full circle. There's no question about that.
All right.
Just to summarize, look for the brilliance or the bright light in the circumstance or in your child, and then, find a group, right, that you can be engaged with, not on a temporary basis, but maybe on a longer term basis, like you were just describing. You don't want to try to shoulder this on your own. That's just asking for a bigger challenge than necessary. That's what I heard you say.
Yeah, that's pretty good, son.
So I'm sort of curious to know, why is it that you've agreed to be a mentor father as part of the Special Fathers Network?
It's sort of my profession. I work in that field of being either a coach or a mentor and a therapist, and I want to give it away because I've received camaraderie and brotherhood, to some degree mentorship for sure from my brothers, knowing the value of having others with me and being able to call them or have them just let me fall apart and see me rant and rave and be angry and just weep. I'm so glad I've had that. So if I can allow or support somebody else to do that, I would love that.
Great. Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Well, Owen Marcus, founder of Sand-Piint Men's Group and Evryman, connected us, David. And so I'm just super grateful to him. I'm not sure how you found him, but when we first spoke a couple of weeks ago, I said to Lisa, I was like, oh my God, look at this amazing group. I didn't even know they're out there. So what you guys are doing, what the Special Dads Network is doing is just so phenomenal. So I'm thrilled to have stumbled upon this. And a couple of weeks ago, the virtual workshop was there that I, spent some time with. And I guess I'm grateful to have stumbled upon it and to see, I'm inspired by that there's other good work happening in the world. Not like I didn't know that, but to find one that matches and aligns with me in this way has been really cool, really quite good.
Yeah, well, thank you for giving a shout out to Owen Marcus of Evryman for helping connect us. If somebody wants to learn about Evryman or to contact you, what would be the best way to do that?
Sure. A good email address you could use, david@echo-springs.com.
Okay. I'm happy to put that in the show notes, so make it as easy as possible for somebody to connect or to follow up with you.
Sure.
David, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, David is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stcenturydads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. David, thanks again.
Thank you so much, David. My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children match up with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support other dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stcenturydads.org.
The Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast was produced by me, Tom Couch. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.